This week's show, we have a special tribute to a Canadian sports legend, the one and only George Chuvalo. Joe Tilley Sports, coming up. Welcome to the program. Today, we have a special tribute for a Canadian boxing legend. Born and raised in Toronto, former amateur champion, he held the Canadian heavyweight belt for 21 years, a record that definitely will never be broken. He fought for the world title against the best in the game. He fought Floyd Patterson, Joe Frazier, George Foreman, Jimmy Young, twice. He went the distance with the legendary Muhammad Ali. He beat Cleveland Williams. He knocked out Jerry Quarry and Doug Jones. Ladies and gentlemen, a tribute today to the legendary George Chuvalo. And joining us is George's son, Mitchell. He's a longtime educator and a coach, once named Canada's High School Coach of the Year. Mitch, glad to have you here.
Thank you. Great to be here, Joe. Thank you. Great to be here, Joe.
Yes. It's awesome to have you here, Mitch. Boxing historian Lou Eisen, who's written for Ring Magazine, Boxing Monthly, The Fight Network, Ringside Report, KO Digest, Beatboxers.com, The Toronto Star. He's been on CBC, ESPN, TSN. He's on the selection committee for the International Boxing Hall of Fame. Lou has just sent a new book to publication entitled Boxing's Greatest Controversies, Blunders, Blood Feuds, and Bad Decisions. Welcome to the program, Lou.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just wanted to say that for Mitch, Educator of the Year, that runs in the family. Because George's granddaughter won I think, Student of the Year, right, in Canada.
Yeah, my niece, Rachel, who passed, she was 30 when she passed. She was an educator. She was a brilliant student and a young woman who had her whole life ahead of her, and she unfortunately died of cancer very young. So tragic, but she had an eventful 30 or 31 years. So we take some solace in that. But life's harsh, no doubt.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Well,
I didn't mean to. I just wanted to say that the educational thing runs deep in George's family.
Thank you.
We know that tragedy has certainly hit your family, Mitchell, which we get into a little bit later. But first of all, I just want to ask you how your dad is doing. And I know he's 83 now and probably not really well, right?
No, you're right, Joe. As is the case with all fighters who have some career of length and repute, He suffered dementia. It came on like a tsunami the last few years. I'd say the last 8 or 9 years, it came on heavily, and he is now deep in the throes of dementia. He's in a home, a retirement home with a facility that helps him with his memory care. They've been very good, but not. They were subject, like everybody else, and George actually had COVID, but he recovered. Can you believe it? That Rock of Gibraltar recovered. Asymptomatic, and he recovered. But in terms of his cognitive capacity, he's nowhere near what he used to be, as is expected for anybody at 83, but for an individual who had that lengthy career during that era, you think about all the punishment he absorbed and gave out, and that included both during the fights and in sparring. I'm amazed that he hung in there for so long, and if you think of his contemporaries, he's outlasted them all. So again, that's a tribute to his resilience. which was established very early in his career. Like if George was one thing, he was resilient in every facet in his life, and he continues to show that now, even in his advanced years. So I'm still very proud of him that way.
Well, we send all our best wishes to you and your family, and to George, of course. Next time you see him, please give us a big hug for him. Maybe he won't. It won't register for him, but I mean, the meaning is certainly there, and it's the fact that he had COVID and got through it doesn't surprise me at all, because he was, like you mentioned, probably the most resilient athlete Canada's ever produced.
Right, that's his last knockout victory. That's a knockout victory, right? George. COVID came and he said it's not going to go down this way. Knocked it out.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So the doctors. So when they sent him from his residence to the hospital, the doctor phoned me up and said, "What? Do you know why they sent him here?" I said, "Well, he's got COVID." They go, "Yeah, but is there a reason why they sent him?" I said, "Well, apparently he wasn't eating or drinking anything, because when you get COVID, it affects your ability to taste, smell, and you get lethargic, and they were worried about him that way." The doctor said, "Yes, but I'm looking at all his vital signs. They're fantastic for an 83-year-old. Like his blood pressure, his sugar levels, heart rate, all those the tests that came back. They go, he's amazing." So, we can look forward to him being around for a little while longer, and as long as he's safe and comfortable, which is the key, for anybody when they get a little older, in a diminished state. If we can keep that going, then that's the best we can hope for him. And I look forward to help him stay that way, safe and comfortable. It's the best way to describe it.
Let's talk a little bit about his career, right? Oh, go ahead, Lou. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention something. I repeat stories a lot. My great uncle David was your father's doctor for his first professional fight. I don't know if I told you this. And he came into his office. He came in 1955, I think it was. And so my uncle Dave looks at him and says, "You're in great shape." And he said, "We're going to take your weight." So your father just had a towel around him. So he stepped in the hallway on the scale, and my uncle said the 25 women in the office swooned all at the same time. all their faces going deep red.
Whoa!
Gorgeous. And all he could hear was, "You're married, but he's gorgeous. Look at his body." They couldn't believe it.
Well, when George was in good shape, he had many female admirers. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Yes, hundreds of thousands to be more correct. Yeah. But yes.
Yeah, he was a finely tuned machine.
And it was the swinging 60s too, guys. Remember, it was all like a different time period. Yeah. There he is. There's the young man.
I was on ESPN. Angelo Dundee died in 2012. So around 2010, this is 11 years ago. Angelo died, or before Angelo died. So last year we were on ESPN Radio at the Hall of Fame, which you've been to many times, in Canastota, New York. And so they were talking about great fighters from the past. And the announcer, Brian Kennedy, said, "Angelo, how would George Chuvalo do against the Klitschko brothers?" And he said he'd probably take Vladimir in about 10 rounds, and he'd probably take his brother in about 9. And they said, "Why 9 or 10? And Angelo said, "Well, he's 67. I mean, you got to give him time to warm up."
Well, listen. Angelo's not unlike a lot of people who watch boxing. They have a tendency to probably overrate the time period that they became enamored with the sport, and they were productive in the sport, as he was as a trainer and manager. And the Klitschkos take a lot of heat, but you know what? In retrospect, they're pretty good athletes for big guys. And
they were, absolutely.
I'm not going to venture a guess, but as to how George would have done. But they would have. I'll tell you what. They would have been it would have been an action fight between either one of them and George. Right. So I don't like to disparage the modern guys. A lot of people do, but there are some still great modern day athletes in boxing. Yeah,
absolutely. But for most of George's career, if not all, he feasted on those guys. Because those guys, but guys like that, like Dijon, Ernie Terrell, didn't have good balance.
Yeah,
and a guy like that against George took a beating.
And the one thing about George had tremendous, you know this yourself, Lou, and of course Joe being a former fighter. George had a capacity to stay strong the whole of the fight, right?
Like he got strong as the fight went on.
3 or 4 rounds. Yeah, he could sustain it. And he did that because of his maniacal and obsessive training methodologies, right? So, that always, when you come into a fight with the confidence of being in great shape, then you can assert your will for a longer period of time than the other individual can. I love watching fights where George wears people down. Like I love that because that's a battle of wills and attrition, right? So that to me, that's when fighting becomes really primal beyond all the technique, when it becomes a battle of will like that. And guys, because you're both boxing fans, the greatest fights of all time is where you see that battle like displayed up front. And the Frazier fight, the first one, that was just like, unbelievable. There's George against Muhammad. Boom. Come on, Georgie, close the gap. Holding his hands.
Yeah.
He blocked that one. There he goes to the body, ripping him to the body.
Let's talk about those. Let's talk about those 2 fights with Ali. Okay, so both happened to be in Canada, which was pretty cool as it worked out. But not many people gave George a shot in either fight, and in both cases, when the fight was over, George was still throwing, and Ali was the one who was worse for the wear, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry.
Go ahead, Lou. Go ahead. I'll fill in after you.
Well,
go ahead.
Absolutely. No one gave George a shot. In fact, it's hard to have any respect for the Ontario Boxing Commission. They wouldn't license it as a world title fight, as Mitch knows. Everywhere else on earth, this was the world title fight. But the Ontario Boxing Commission, whose only job is to make sure that the tickets printed are legitimate, to collect taxes, and to have a doctor present, said, well, we don't think George is good enough. Even though he's rated number 3 on earth, we don't think he's good enough. It's not their job to rate fighters. So he goes in there, and no one gives him a chance. Here's George, who's never been staggered in his career, never been hurt. The best, as Al Bernstein said, the premier body puncher, he said this recently, of the last, 60, 70 years was George Chuvalo. He goes in and pounds Ali's body, gives him the fight of a lifetime, and people are stunned. And right after the fight, there was an interview Muhammad did with Thomas Hauser, his future biographer. And he asked him, he was talking about, sports writers say that you shouldn't. And he said, I'm tired of sports writers. You know nothing. All of you said that Chuvalo wouldn't go 2 rounds. That was the toughest fight I ever had in my life. It wrecked me. My side still hurt. Then you said I shouldn't be fighting a guy like Patterson, and Patterson was easy. So he said, look at George. I mean, look at him there. He's not taking a step back. He won't give in.
No. And everybody's... Yeah, when everybody thinks, people who don't know boxing often talk about it in very cliched modes, right? So the sense that George was just a punching bag, and you any a thoughtful analysis of what had just transpired there. George is landing punches. He's blocking punches. Look, he just blocked 2 there and countered with a left hook. Blocks that, got a jab in, misses with a hook, blocks that. He didn't just sit there taking punches. People talk in such cliches because they don't know how to analyze and break down a fight, right? To them, it's super simple.
Absolutely.
But it's probably one, and I think both of you will agree, one of the most difficult psychological, physical events you could ever be involved in, and things are happening at rapid speed. Look at George just put 4 punches together against Muhammad there, and they talk about George being an wall who just walks in, waiting. Look at not getting hit with everything. He blocks most of those shots there. He blocked those 2. So when people say that, I think, I don't know, they're trying to sound like they're knowledgeable of what's going on, but the more you talk to people about boxing, really. the more you find out how much they don't know about it. What they say often displays to me what they don't know as opposed to what they do know. So yeah, when you talk about George not getting the respect going into the fight, you have to remember that he'd lost 2 of the 3 previous fights. Controversially, I might add, because he lost the fight to Terrell. Then he went over to England and he fought Eduardo Corletti, and the English Boxing Board so did not want George to fight Henry Cooper that they awarded the fight to Corletti, and Corletti apparently didn't even land a punch during the whole fight. All he did was run. And then England at the time, the referee just goes over and holds his one man's hand, and that's the decision. So to discredit George from ever fighting Cooper, and then here in Toronto, there were all kinds of hijinks going on with supposedly with the mob and Terrell and his handlers and things of that nature, and the referee Sammy Lufsman being threatened along with Irv Ungerman, all kinds of
fact. That's all fact.
Yeah,
that's fact. That's all documented.
So when people say, he lost 2 of the 3 previous fights, they don't give you the background info that goes with that, right? So, you can look at a record, but you need the backstory. And that's where people like you come in, Lou, who fill in the backstory. So it's good on you, brother.
Right.
Well, I got to tell you.
So tell us about the Terrell fight, Lou. Yeah.
Well, I asked Henry Cooper years later at the Hall of Fame, how come he never fought Chuvalo? And he said, I didn't even want to meet George socially. I didn't want to get in the ring with him. I didn't want. He's too strong, and he's a super heavyweight. So it's not. And the kind of fight I fight and I bleed just wasn't going to work out for me. With Ernie Terrell, it was different. Ernie Terrell was a mob fighter. When they took Ali's, when you sign for a title fight, you often sign for a rematch if you're the challenger, just in case you win. And so Ali had to do that with Liston, whose people were mobsters. Mm-hmm. And WBA said, we don't like rematches, so they took his title away, WBA title, and they had a fight between Eddie Macon and Ernie Terrell. And before the fight, Eddie Macon said, I don't know why I'm fighting Terrell. They're going to give him the fight. And they did. Terrell was probably the dirtiest fighter of his era, one of the top dirtiest fighters of all time. And so he fights George up here in Toronto. And Bernie Glickman's allowed in, and Bernie Glickman is hired killer for the mob. How he got past customs, I'll never know. But it's on record with the RCMP and the FBI that he threatened Irv Ungerman, and he threatened Samuel Offspring. Those aren't rumors. Those are actual records that were entered into a court. There's a standing Senate subcommittee on organized crime that started in the 50s. It still exists today. You can go there and you can look up on the U.S. government site how Bernie Glickman threatened those 2 people. So the fight goes, and I think around the 9th or 10th round, I stopped counting by then, but I think I got up to like 89 fouls that Terrell had landed. Terrell, it's the only time 89. I saw George. 89. And it's still going on. It's the only time in all George's fights ever where I saw him turn to the referee and say, he's thumbing me. And you watch it, and he's not hiding it. He's thumbing George on purpose. He gets him in close. He's headbutting him. He's using his knee, stepping on his foot. He's using his forearms like that. Every time he gets in, he hits him with the forearm. And he's fouling. And the only time George can complain is with the thumb. Thumbed him the whole time. And when you're thumbing a guy, you're taking away his livelihood.
Yeah, you're right. So you can detach a retina. I must tell you that George said after the last time Terrell thumbed him, George gave him a beautiful headbutt. He said he timed it gorgeously, so it looked like a punch was soon to fall, and he sliced him a little bit. He said, I got him for that one. He stopped thumbing me late in the fight up. He said, I should have done it earlier. That's what George said. But
he was right, because you have to, because that's the only thing they listen to.
Oh, it's.
But even with all that, though, the decision that Terrell got was bogus. In addition to that, right? I mean, George won the fight.
Face. Look at Terrell's face after, and look at George's face. Who would you rather be? George landed more punches on Ernie Terrell, and he was the effective aggressor. He won more rounds. He won the fight. It was stolen from him by the mafia.
Can I say, if you ever get an opportunity to watch that fight, watch how many times Terrell holds.
All the time, the octopus.
I've seen fights
Yeah.
where a guy was disqualified for holding.
Yeah.
Now, I don't blame Sammy Lovespring in any way, shape, or form. That's, water under the bridge. And my dad and Sammy had beef after, but I want to say, thankfully, they became friends later, because it must be a hell of a thing to have your family threatened by the mob and all that kind of stuff. I get that. But what irks me about Sammy is he did not warn Ernie Terrell once for holding. Holding is against the rules. I've seen fights prior and after that where fighters were disqualified for holding. Disqualified.
Yeah, I can name you fight.
I lost count after like 90 holds where they were 90 just grabbing the guy. You can't do that. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to fight. No. So it amazes. That fight will always go down. I know George was very frustrated about that one, and I know in his darkest moments when he looked back with some regret on his career, he always regretted he didn't get that. You know what kind of hurt him too? I think the fact that it took place in Toronto and that still happened, right? It'd be different if you fought
didn't stand up for him.
So he always felt like a second-class sports citizen in Toronto a little bit, and his relationship certainly with the Canadian Boxing Federation and the Ontario Boxing Commission. Those were strained relationships for a long time, and it goes back to what really transpired there, Lou. That you saw or talk about, hanky panky going on there.
Yeah, but you're giving a conservative estimate when you say he was held 90 times, hundreds of times, and Henry
Akin counting after 90.
Yeah, Henry Akinwande fought Lennox Lewis. Right, and Henry Akinwande was disqualified after holding Lennox Lewis 7 or 8 times. And the referee said, "That's it. You're not here to fight. Get out. You're done."
Yeah,
and that's why Ali called Terrell the octopus. And Ali said, "This is Ernie Terrell fighting. Thumb, 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 elbow, hold." And that was Terrell. Terrell was beaten thoroughly. He knew he was beaten. The fans knew it. The judges knew it. And the mob just said, no, it's not going to go down that way. So when people say, boxing was better when the mob controlled it, for who? Who was it better for? George won the title.
It's better for their guys. It's better for their guys.
That's right.
I said, and their guys ended up broke. I said to George, you got to start billing yourself, this is several years ago, as the WBA World Heavyweight Champion, because you won it. And if you don't let people know the truth, you won the title. You beat him. He knows you beat him. Look at his face after. You had nothing on your face. He was completely beaten up.
Let's talk about another fight that George won that didn't get the decision for, a big fight, and that was Floyd Patterson in Madison Square Garden. Another fight that there were some complications for that one too. Lou, I know you got some insight on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Angelo told me, he said, there's no doubt, everyone knew George won the fight. He said also, Ron Lipton, who Mitch knows, and I'm sure you know, the referee and loves George, said I was sitting ringside. So was Bud Schulberg and Norman Mailer. I spoke to both of them on the set of Cinderella Man, and they said George won that fight. Everyone knew it, but Angelo said he didn't get the decision for several reasons, one of which was the fight was in New York. Patterson's a New York fighter. He's a former heavyweight world champion, so they're going to give it to him. All he had to do was stand on his feet to the end. And that's a very salient point because George's people wanted the fight to be 15 rounds. Patterson said there's no fight unless it goes 12 rounds. So better a fight than no fight. If the fight goes 15 rounds...
Can I correct you there? I think Patterson initially argued for a 10-round fight, and then they made a compromise with a 12. He actually wanted a 10-rounder, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong.
No, you're right. And we all know if the fight goes 15, Patterson collapses in the 13th round. George beat him from pillar to post. Patterson didn't fight again for almost a year. He was injured. He took tremendous beating. The fans in New York were stunned. The New York writers who were good to George were stunned. And in the book on Floyd Patterson by William Strawn, they said Patterson got a gift in 2 fights. The first one was Yvonne Durrell in the 50s, and the second one with George Chuvalo in the 60s, where they said Chuvalo pitched a shutout I gave George 10 of the 12 rounds. Most people did. Some people had it higher, and then they just went and screwed him because George didn't have the muscle behind him to go say, no, you're not going to do that to me.
Yeah.
Patterson was never the same again.
I look, yeah, it's true. That's true. He was never the same again. The thing that interests me about the Patterson fight was the way my dad reflects on it. Like, to score a fight is like Patterson. I'll give Patterson and D'Amato very much credit in this regard. George would win the first 2.5 minutes of the round, and then Patterson would flurry for the last 10, 15 seconds to leave an impression in the judges' minds. So a lot of it goes to like the way you like metacognitively, the way you think about a fight. How do I score it? What is it? The last impression that counts, or can I, in realistic terms, assess the whole of the round? Because normally we have a better remembrance of what happened most recently, as opposed to what happened farther back in our memory. So I give they fought an intelligent fight that way, and the way my father remembers that fight, I kind of feel good about, because he said, yeah, Patterson got it. I thought I won the fight, and Patterson got it. It was in his hometown, former champ. But he goes, one thing you got to remember, that was the fight of the year in 1965. The Ring magazine said of all the fights that transpired in 1965, that was the fight of the year. And when you think back on George's career, and people have said, oh, yeah, he was, applauding a Neanderthal-like caveman who didn't have anything in the way of skill. I turn to them and say, listen, my old man fought the fight of the year in 1965, Ring magazine, right? Yeah, there it is. I say, what did your dad do? So I pull rank a little bit.
Listen, Mitch,
that's the way my dad will be remembered. And I know when my dad wanted to feel good about his career, he always would look back and say, you know what? I fought the fight of the year in 1965. Yeah, the judges said I came up short, but I can live with that.
Mitch, it's considered to be the greatest non-title heavyweight fight of all time, and it's one of the top 5 or 6 great heavyweight fights ever. So if you go back 300 years to say that your father had the best, heavyweight title fight, non-title fight ever in a 300-year history, who else can say that?
That's not so bad. That's not so bad.
No one else can say that.
That's not so bad, yeah.
Patterson came over. Patterson, as you know, Mitch came over and kissed him after and said, you know what? They gave me the decision, but the fans love you.
You know what? Floyd actually wanted George to come to New York and train with him, because he said, yeah, I think it was really, yeah, he really said, but George wanting to stay in Canada and with his family, I get all that, but I often think there were a couple of times in my dad's career where he could have gone a different direction managerially or with trainers or something like that, and that's one of the time periods, because I think my dad was really looking for, throughout his career, was a soulmate, an intellectual soulmate, right? So, He had trouble with his trainers who were limited. He had trouble with his managers who he didn't feel were knowledgeable enough about training. He was really looking for an intellectual soulmate in that regard. And a couple of times during his career, that was one of them. Another time was a year later with the great Lloyd Percival, who was so far ahead of the game in terms of athletic conditioning and psychological training for athletes. If George would have taken a turn to the left or right there, things might have been a little different for him. Maybe not, but I know that he was really searching for someone he could relate to on an intellectual level about his craft, right? And I think he and Floyd was a thoughtful man, right? He was one thing he was regarded as being a thinking and a well-mannered, polite guy. And a real intellect, who was sadly in the end struck by dementia too. But they had a friendship after, and Floyd always talks about that as being one of his greatest victories. By the way, which is high. I take that as high praise too. So. All in all, I have no qualms about the Patterson fight. George talks about walking down into the ring like that. He said it was, aside from having, your children born and knowing they're healthy, he said that was, what the greatest, like he was never more alive, I think was his description
And
of that.
Johnny Addy, right? Johnny Addy introducing him as the king of all Canada. Not just the king of Canada, the king of all Canada.
Yeah, and the tradition, just walking into that tradition. George said he felt like he was part of something larger than himself,
Oh, he was. It was. The first Madison Square Garden went back to the 1800s. He walked down the aisles that John L. Sullivan walked down, that Joe Louis walked down.
Dempsey, Lewis, Marciano, all of them. So yeah. So I look back on George's career, and he had some disappointing parts of his career, but then he also had some beautiful highlights, right? So we like I tell everybody, we should all be that alive sometime in our lives. Life compromises all of us, but to have a moment like that in your life, in your back pocket for when you're feeling a little down. Oh, that's a pretty good piece of emotional arsenal you have, right? So I feel good about the Patterson fight, all in all, really.
I have a story I have to tell you. At the Hall of Fame, they were having a Madison Square Garden night on the Friday night. So your father got up to speak, and he's talking about the majesty of Madison Square Garden. I'm coming from Toronto, and since I was a kid, everyone in the world is reading about the majesty, and here I am, the King of Canada, walking down. And there were some fighters at the far end that were talking. Sugar Ray Leonard was there, but he wasn't talking. They wouldn't listen to Sugar Ray. And sitting beside me was Ruben Olivares. And he got so angry, he went over to them and told them to shut up. He was angry. And when I got back, I said, that was brave of you. And he reached into his jacket, he pulled out a wallet, and he took out a black and white picture of your father. And he said whatever he said in Spanish. And Gene Aguilera, his interpreter, his manager, said, that's his hero. That's who he patted himself after. Yeah. And so he was in tears. This is George Chuvalo. It's my hero. Shut up. And these guys, shut up. And so George continued.
Yeah, and there's the tradition. All fighters fall in love with a fighter that they watched growing up. They pattern themselves after in some way, shape, or form, and the tradition continues, right? That's the beauty of it. We all learn from others, right? So yeah, that's a gorgeous story, Lou. Thanks for relaying that to me. My dad loved Joe Louis. My dad loved Joe Louis when he was a kid. I remember seeing him on the cover of Ring magazine, and oh my goodness, he was just totally in love. And when an opportunity for Joe to although Joe was not much of a trainer and couldn't pass on much knowledge, but just to be around the camps was good for my dad's spirit, because it reminded him why he got involved with the sport in the first place, right?
Right, and Charlie Goldman, who trained Marciano, loved your father, and he wanted to train him. So he was the one in the early 60s, but Charlie was very old. He was in his 80s by then. But he saw him in New York, and he said, George, you're throwing punches out the window. So don't throw punches out the I'm trying to get my head situated here. He said, don't throw punches out the window. He said, stand your ground, turn it to hips, fire from the shoulder. And he got in the ring, and he was showing him. He said, it's just a little adjustment. But from that point on, your father flattens everyone. And to me, when George started, there was no Charlie Goldman or Dundee or Ray Arcel in Canada. There wasn't. There was no one to teach him. And as he said to me, he said, I wish I would have gone through the 6th round and 8th round. I'm not putting him down, obviously, but, the learning process. George was put into 15-round fights immediately. He was a big name immediately. He was a draw.
Too young. He was a draw in a town that was starved for like a fighter. His manager at the time, Jack Deacon Allen, was an older guy. He was in his last couple of years, so he rushed him. My dad was fighting guys in the top 10, Johnny Arthurs and things, like after in his first 10 fights. That's unheard of. That's like, somebody goes to the OHL, and his first couple of games in the OHL, he's playing the Stanley Cup champions or people who competed for it the year before. It's like ridiculous. So rushed. And you can see that stylistically with George, because George was initially a counter puncher, right? And that was fine for people who didn't jab a lot, but for people who had great length, he had to learn how to defeat the jab, and he did that later in his career by getting lower and then using his feet a lot more. If he would have learned that earlier on, I think there's no doubt he would have been world champ. But again, it's finding that kind of intellectual soulmate, that father-brother figure that I think all athletes need to learn from and have a discourse with all the time. And George never really found that in his career. And all athletes need to get a little lucky in finding someone who can pass on, transfer knowledge, who've been there and have the cred to go with it, right? And match wits, because George was a bright guy. I think George can be only described as an intelligent fighter. I mean, his intellect was outstanding, and I kind of. I don't like it when people talk about him like being a Neanderthal, because that's the last thing he was. He was a thinking man's fighter. If he didn't have all the wasn't a stick in boxing, if you stick and move, you throw a jab and you move, you're considered an intellectual. If you're an inside fighter, you're considered a Neanderthal. Those cliched stereotypes really don't hold under any kind of scrutiny and analysis. There's George. There's fighting Patterson.
Well, I'd say he's more than an intellect than in the ring, because he was, as we said the last time we were together, he was the first guy to stand up, the first celebrity to stand up for Muhammad Ali not going into the Vietnam War.
Yeah,
and
true.
So, and when I spoke to him, this is what he said to me. Now, who else would say this? He said, the Vietnam War is based on the failed domino theory, that if one country, if Vietnam became communist, and every other Asian country would. What other prize fighter could say that to you and discuss, politics in East Asia and understand it to that extent? And he said that the domino theory was incorrect. It was obsolete before the United States believed in it, and they wouldn't listen. And he said that's that's one of the reasons they went after Muhammad. Also because he changed his name, although he did it legally, and he was part of this very fringe religious sect. And he said they wanted to get him to Vietnam, and they weren't going after Joe Namath or Tom Seaver or other athletes. They were going after Muhammad Ali.
Muhammad Ali,
based on
of course.
Theory.
They reclassified Muhammad. First Muhammad was not. I think he was dyslexic. He had reading problems, so they didn't rate him. Can you believe? It makes you think about testing of the intellect. They said Muhammad wasn't smart enough to be in the army. He was too smart to be in the army. He wasn't extremely literate in terms of his reading or writing skills, but a sharper mind you can never find. But the part I love about George is he said, and we're talking now metacognitively now, thinking about thinking. He said, Muhammad is standing up to a lot of people in power, and that's got to wear on his brain. And he said, I respect a man who can handle that kind of pressure. And I think that statement alone cemented their friendship, because George kind of could empathize and sympathize with Muhammad's plight beyond the boxing ring, and then admire him for still being able to be such a capable fighter amidst all those pressures, right? So that really cemented their friendship, that George could see the bigger picture, which you alluded to, Lou, for sure. Absolutely.
And also that George always called him Muhammad. He never kept calling him Clay.
No.
He never insulted him like that. And that's one reason George is unique, in that there are very few, sad to say, white fighters that were as close to African-American fighters as your father was. Your father is exceptionally close to Joe Frazier. He always gave Frazier his due. He was exceptionally close to Larry Holmes, Floyd Patterson. He was even friends with Liston. So, your father always judged a person by the content of his character, rather than, he never saw skin color.
Yeah,
and you can't say that about a fighter back then.
Boxing is a sport of exploitation, unfortunately, in so many ways, right?
Yes.
So who gets exploited? It's the poor fighter. Boxing is traditionally the sport of the underclass, right? The people who are lowest on the economic totem pole. And my dad, my dad was always as you spoke of, the word about a person's character, and that was how he judged whether or not the person was a good person or not. Of course, not by race. And when you're in fighting anyway, what you end up realizing is people are all the same anyway. People are all the same.
That's
They're all
right.
struggling for the same thing. They're all struggling for the same thing, regardless of the color of their skin or their background, their ethnicity or language or whatever. They're all there for the same. They're struggling, right? It's the struggle. It's the epic struggle, and you respect people who go through that, right? There's a similarity of experience that bonds people together. Yeah, I often think of
Yeah, very
my
much.
dad and Teddy McQuarter. My dad and Teddy McQuarter, his trainer from originally from Alabama, boyhood friend of Joe Louis. They're both end up in Detroit, and I think of the both of them together. And this one. I have this beautiful. I didn't experience it. I only experienced George talking about it. That after the Mike DeJohn fight in '64, they or was it '63? I don't know, '63 or '64. After the fight's over, they go out to celebrate, and they go to a rock and roll show, right? And the crowd was predominantly black, right? And in walks George with Teddy McQuarter, and they're welcomed like, hey, they're George Chuvalo the fight. It was just like, we're celebrating a fight. Everybody's hanging out together. We're having a good time, and yeah, George and Teddy lived through some. They lived through the '60s and that segregated area, transferring into the civil rights era, and everybody having more consciousness that way. That was a beautiful thing to travel through with Teddy by his side too, and they saw a lot of things together that I'm sure if they were unpacked and described, that there'd be some great stories to tell there too. So sorry, go ahead, Lou.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt. What I was going to say is even though there could be, it's a rock and roll show, even to rock and roll musicians, as you know, Mitch, being the father of a superstar and a hero, not just a Canadian hero, a universal, worldwide hero with millions, hundreds of millions of fans, is that you could be a rock and roll star, but George Chuvalo is still way up above that. Because he's doing something that people, they may be a star in New York or whatever, but George is known throughout the world. That's why when I spoke with Dana White and he said, the most famous Canadian athlete of all time was George St. Pierre. And I said to him, that's completely laughable.
What?
I said, George is known on every continent on earth. He fought Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali is known by billions of people. I said, George could go to Australia. He could go to Asia. George, anywhere in the States. He could go to the Middle East. They would know who he is. They would say George Chuvalo, Canada. George St. Pierre can't do that. Only George Chuvalo.
The thing I always talk about, and Joe, you'd know this being in the media all of your life, people ask me oftentimes what it was like to be his son, as a generalist question. Right? Like, what was it like having a dad who was a heavyweight fighter? And what I always talk about is, the exposure that he got. You got, as you know, guys, in the early part of the 20th century, the media was basically two things. It was newspapers and radio.
Right.
And the three sports that translated so well to those mediums were baseball,
right,
horse racing, and boxing. Right?
Right.
So George came along at a time where boxing transitioned from radio sport into television sport. Right? And so it went from the radio, where he heard it a lot, onto into television with Tuesday night fights, the Friday night fights. It became big time on television. That was the biggest piece of reality TV you were going to ever get on TV in the 50s and 60s, right? And watching that growing up and being a part of that made him a much more visible athlete than, even though he wasn't on TV like, let's say, a hockey player would be every Saturday night in Canada. But still, when George appeared, especially in the international market in the US of A, that was a big deal, man. That was hugely big.
Millions and millions and millions.
Yeah, and back then, yeah. And then your point about George being an international star. Do you know that I still get on Facebook people from Australia, Sweden, Croatia, South Africa, Ireland, all over the United States, South America, Brazil, always asking me about my dad. So yeah, the reach, as you say, was huge. It was enormous. And I think of that. That's yeah, he was on TV, but that kind of it encoded it and imprinted on people's minds. So like fathers and grandfathers, when they talked about watching when they were a kid, they would, and that people would that would somehow stick in their brain. Oh yeah, I've heard about your dad. Your dad used to tell me. My dad used to tell me about your dad. My grandfather used to tell me about your dad. My sister-in-law remembers seeing your dad somewhere at some shop somewhere. So all those, I have all those memories. Like I get flooded with them all the time. So my dad will always be on my consciousness that way. For better or for
and
worse. For better.
Yeah, and
for better.
For better for everyone. As you know, at the Hall of Fame, when he would sign autographs, the lineup would be 400, 500, 600 people waiting in the sun, and he wouldn't rush anyone. So a kid would want a photo, sign an autograph. Kids were special because, you know, George has this magic where 5, 6, 7-year-old kids will climb on him, because they just feel he's their grandfather. So they climb on him, they kiss him. Can I have a picture? And they get a picture. And he always says, how's school going? How's your mom and dad? And he talks to them. And people wait. And it's usually, like you said, grandfather, father, and son waiting to get this, plus other fighters. Ron Lyle waited in line to get George's autograph. And George said, what are you doing? Get over here. I'll give you my autograph. Wait in line. You're Ron Lyle. But he waited in line with everyone else. So, you know, it was. I wish all Canadians could see that the lineup went forever. And then when he would go into the Friday night dinner or the Saturday banquet, he'd rarely get to eat because he'd be outside for part of it. They wouldn't let up. Just one more, please, George. One more.
He'd make up eating late at night. He'd make up eating late at night. He'd more than compensate because George can eat.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I mean,
well,
George,
Mitch, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead. So I'm sorry.
No, finish your story. Finish your thought.
No, I just the one part I want you to know about the International Boxing Hall of Fame and signing autographs is he would never charge for them.
That's right.
You know, other athletes would charge for those, and one thing I always loved about his attitude there, he wouldn't charge. You know, he said these were people who followed my career or knew of me through some other person, like a relative, as I spoke to earlier, and he would never charge. He would never, because that kind of love can't be bought or sold. I mean, those people would line up there, and always to a person they would say, your dad's such a nice. He'd take a minute or two to talk to them. He recognized what a gift it was to be a public figure, right? So, and as much as that could be paid something, as much as that could be a
for your father, that been the 5 or 6 or 800,000th autograph, but for them it's the first time, and your father knew what he meant to people, so he knew how important that was when they came to him. And my joy was to see these people walk up and look at him, and then say and whisper. They'd always whisper outside, "Is that George Chuvalo? You think I can meet him? Sure. What should I do? Just go up and say hi. I'd like to meet you." Very friendly. And I would say, George, this is a doctor from Nashville. He said he's followed your fights. And then George would say, great. And they would talk for a couple minutes. And George would give him an autograph. And this was all over the Hall of Fame grounds. And when we went into the Saturday night banquet in Syracuse, there's this outer room with all these chairs. There's a set number of love seats. And I walked in with George and a couple other people, and the seats were taken. But Mike Weaver and Ron Lyle and all these other heavyweights, the minute George came in, all got up and said, "George, please take my seat. I insist." They all did.
Well, there's that honored tradition you're speaking of, right? And in some way, the old guys will always be remembered and commemorated and a lot and respected, because like those were the people that those fighters looked towards or looked to when they were just coming onto the scene, right? And heard stories about and watched films of, and that's it's that honored tradition, right? The great thing about George is his international reputation. And I spoke to you before about this, Joe. Pat Marsden, he made such a beautiful telling statement about George. He said, people don't realize that we're talking about internationally, not domestically, but internationally during the 1960s. George was the international athlete on the Canadian scene. There was nobody bigger. Domestically, we had hockey, but hockey was a six. The NHL was,
right.
a team league at the time, right? And not the whole world doesn't play hockey, of course.
People in Asia didn't know who Tim Horton was, right? And yeah, right.
Yeah, and boxing goes back 3,000 years to the first Olympics.
They might know Timmy's. There's probably a Timmy's.
They know Timmy's. Yeah. There probably is now. Yeah, for sure.
And George, you were mentioning before, Mitch. You were saying how people mistakenly, and they just don't know boxing, say your father was a catcher, but to be in the top 10 for 15 years, George was an elite level, top 3 ranked world heavyweight. It's that simple. An elite
for a long time. Yeah, a long
time. For 15 years. And you don't get that by accident. You have to earn that.
I love this picture. This picture is in the local barber shop where I take George for haircuts. My buddy in the junction, Dario Prodomani, cuts my dad's hair. Anyway, he had this picture up. So I got a hold of a copy of it. And it's such a great picture because that's the west end of Toronto. Somewhere around Davenport Avenue when it gets close to Old Weston Road. My grandparents lived around there. And there's George in the middle of winter wearing what it looks like I think he'd be maybe just transitioning into the early years of his professional career after an amateur career. And he's got like this stylish top coat on while he's running in work boots along Davenport, the west part of Davenport. And it looks so suburban there. Now, if you go there, the trees are mature and it looks like, it's more part of the city proper. But back then that was like, the outskirts, the western outskirts of Toronto proper, right? And now it's changed so radically. So that's a real nice kind of piece of history there. I like that. I like that shot. There's an
little Toronto history.
Yeah, but I have to think about what my dad. What back 100 years. Look back. How will they interpret him? Right? How are they going to interpret his career? How are they going to interpret his life? And what does his career say about being a Canadian athlete in the 50s, 60s, and 70s? What does it say about being a Canadian fighter? And I think there are many stories yet to be told about it. My dad's had so much written about him. When I really want to go on a deep dive with my dad, I go back and I look up Lou yourself as a writer. You get to like interact with the writer's brain when they're writing about someone as intimate as a family relation to you, right? And so I have many versions of my father in my head, enough to keep me occupied for the rest of my life. And there's Mitch at 17. Young Mitch when I was a budding athlete.
There you go, man.
1970 suspenders and hair, man. I don't know.
Now you're a good football player, my friend. I remember that.
Yeah, I was. Listen, I was okay. I got injured. I injured my knee, thankfully, and I turned to school and thought about a career beyond sport, which was, that was good. That was an enabler for me. Like most people would say, it's terrible you hurt your knee. Nah, it was actually good. I started to think about a bigger world, right? I think of it bigger.
Right.
But I must.
So Mitch,
my dad was very supportive of a career. We all come to all the games. Yeah. He was a great dad. He was dad's dad. That's really good.
When I noticed most about that, Mitch, the pride in your father's eyes. The smile on your father's face.
That picture. Yeah, that's good.
Well,
Mitch,
I'm not.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say. Listen, sometimes it wasn't. I don't want to sound morose or maudlin or like I'm complaining. But sometimes it was tough being his kid as an athlete, right? Because you're a bit of a mark, right? So one of the nicest things my dad ever said to me was, he respected the fact that I could handle that pressure. And, tests of resilience when you're a young person, if you pass them, They set you up for later in life. And, if you have a hard time with them, discover why and move on. People often ask about what it was like to be his kid sometimes. And yeah, there were tough moments, right? There were tough moments, but we got through them. And we should all be, life should always be an incremental test of, your resilience. Sometimes heavy blows happen, but overall being his kid as an athlete and being his kid was a very positive experience for me.
Mitch, that speaks to your class.
Yeah.
And
you talk about,
I just wanted to say.
We're talking in stereo, boys. We're talking in stereo.
Well, you talk about, yeah, I know. Sorry. I want to transition there because you talked about resiliency and you talked about your dad taking those pieces, of memorable pieces that helped him, in tougher times. And I can't think of any family that's had a tougher time than you guys did. And the resiliency that you've had to have, losing 3 brothers, your mother, and of course now you, as you told us earlier, your niece. And, tragedy has hit you guys so hard. How were you able to get through that? And how is George having to lead you through, really, you and Vanessa? And
yeah, I'll be honest. I think what I did was a little different than what our approaches were different, and we've had some major discussions and differences on this. But that's okay. I can live with those differences. What I essentially did was compartmentalize a lot of that and put it behind me, and I had to focus on the now. When those things transpired, I had to deal. I was a young person, and what I've always thought, because we all go through hard times in life. Joe, I know you have for sure, brother. I can empathize with you, and Lou, I'm sure you have too.
Lost my mother when I was 5.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a double-edged sword, because during those dark moments, what you really realize is what you value, what you find most important, right? And yeah, you're going to go through some dark times when that happens, but you always have to be pointed towards the light, right? And part of the reason why you get so upset was because you found meaning in those things that were taken away from you, right? And if you can find meaning in those things that were taken away from you, you can find meaning in survival afterwards, right? Now, sometimes it doesn't feel like that, and what accounts for you feeling like that and somebody else feeling opposite of that and never getting out of that depression or funk or whatever you want to call it. What accounts for one person going one way and another person going for the other way? I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to psychoanalyze people. I know what helped me. I immersed myself in work, and I immersed myself in exercise, because as a phys ed teacher, I realized that the concepts of exercise, eating well, and getting good rest helped me mentally and hormonally. And I got through that. Now, there were sometimes I was obsessive with exercise. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, I work out like 3 hours a day. It was crazy. That's what I needed to get through it, until I could say to myself, okay, now it's starting to be obsessive, and like I can't handle that. What my father did is he reached out to people, right? And he got that that love piece. I tell this to everybody. My brother died days of each other. People would contact us from all over Canada, and they would tell us their stories of, terrible heartbreak and woe, and to know that there were other people out there who could commiserate with you on a really personal level, and that they would reach out to you. Now we're talking in the 80s and 90s now. Now we talk about issues of mental health so casually. Back then, the stigma to even admit to those things, those things were hidden. You put those in the family closet and you don't talk about them, But I remember, like, all these people with openness and love passing on their best, asking them they could do anything for. I found great strength in that. And I know when my father went out to talk to people and talk specifically to young people, he'd get that love, that feedback, right? His was more out in the open. Mine was a little bit of a quieter resilience. His was an open, embracing it, facing it head on, facing issue. Now, family dynamics being what they were, I was not the world's greatest son, right? I was not the world's greatest brother. And I'm going to tell you sometimes, George was not the world's greatest dad. Love my dad. Don't ever get me. I love him. I love him in spite of all that stuff. Maybe because of it, because he showed how human he could be. But he made grievous errors with my brothers and some of their actions and the things he did to facilitate some certain stuff. There's a family dynamic going on with my mom. My dad wasn't, the most faithful person. He had all kinds of affairs, and I think that affected the family dynamic. There are economic issues when a fighter transitions into that period after boxing. What do? Normally they have very few fighters have a college or university education that they could fall back on. They're trying to live off a reputation that gets thrown, to the side as soon as they quit fighting. And people say cruel and mean things about fighters that they never say about other athletes. I think people resent their power structure in a way. The fighter's the ultimate warrior, really, and then when they're done, it's kind of like they have a tendency to just toss them to the side. So there are many things that happened in my family that were problematic, but I always had little tests of resilience along the way that I could fall back on, and I always found meaning in them. And I think George found meaning in connecting to people and talking about issues of addiction and trying to find meaning in love and relationships. And I think his message was strong and heard by large segments of the society. It could be at times a little simplistic for my rendering, and we've had discussions about that, he and I, but that's okay. We can agree to disagree on that. And I know the major point is I know he helped a lot of people. A lot of people saw him symbolically as a piece of like Canadian hard rock and resilience. Yes. And I think that's going to be part of his, 100 years from now, people are going to look back and say, you want to see somebody who was resilient? Brother, this guy was cut out of, the stone that makes Canada what it is. Yeah, the Canadians, very, very good. Right. The Canadian shield. George is made of Canadian shield to some degree. Now, right. I've had discussions with my dad late at night that I'll never tell anybody about. They're too personal. And I've seen him hurt. I've seen him hurt in ways no man should hurt, right? So, yeah. I love my dad. Faults, all the faults, but all his strengths. So he was a human being. He was fully alive as a human being. And I was so lucky, and I'm so fortunate to have had him as a dad. I really have been. The experiences I've shared with him, ups and downs, have been fantastic. It's been a roller coaster. But when it was a roller coaster, but you don't get those lows unless you've had those highs, right? When everything's kind of monotone, right. It's not the same. It's been a hell of a ride in this family.
You say 100 years from now. I think 1,000 years from now is more accurate. I think he'll still be remembered. And if he isn't, then somebody like me hasn't done their job correctly, because he'll last forever. He'll be known, in my opinion, and in my heart, but in the opinion of all Canadians, all 38 million Canadians and many millions around the world, as the preeminent greatest Canadian athlete of all time, a man who was the WBA World Heavyweight Champion, and a man who was in the top 10. How many people in the top 10 in boxing, in any division, for 15 years, and for most of that in the top 3. He was an elite-level heavyweight in his era, and that was the greatest era of heavyweights. And to be in the top 3 in that,
exactly, it was the greatest era.
1,000 years or more.
And George is like kind of emblematic in the poster. There are a lot of great Canadian. You know what I love about your writing, Lou? Is you bring to light people that, Jimmy McLarnin, Brouillard, Larry Gaines. There's so many great Canadian fighters out there. People don't know their stories, but you get the backstory, and you get all the things that influenced their lives and all the struggles they went through. I love reading stories about the humanity. That's the key piece. Joe, you had Ron Ellis on a few weeks ago, and I thought that was one of the most beautiful pieces, because he spoke about his depression, and you hear the humanity. Everybody thinks athletes are just these decontextualized super people who had they had struggles and fights, and when you see their achievements against the backdrop of that, there's the part that connects with people, right? So yeah, George has got a really pair connection between life struggle in the ring, struggle to transition to something after fighting, struggles with family. Look, he's even struggling now, but he's he's fighting the good fight. We all want to hear about fighting the good fight because it becomes symbolic for us, right? And your piece on Ron Ellis was a fantastic piece that way. I came away feeling great after listening to him open up like that. You did a great job with him. So these are the
Frank
stories.
Appreciate that.
Yeah,
Mahovlich had a nervous breakdown because of Punch Imlach treating him so poorly. And like you're saying, Mitch, these guys are perfect pressures. But the fighters you mentioned before, Larry Gaines, Lou Briard, if your father doesn't come along, no one cares about them. He brought them into the next century. If your father doesn't come along, there is no Canadian boxing.
Lennox, the great thing about Lennox is, he loved the past. And he always says about George, George showed us it could be done. He showed us it could be done. And Lennox in that way, he got chastised about British Jamaica, whatever. But there's a Canadian element to Lennox, and it's that gentlemanliness and that honoring the tradition and speaking like a gentleman. And when he does that, he's one of the great Canadian fighters of all time too, in my books.
Oh, and he spoke to your father. He spoke before he went to England, and your father said, "There's no money here. There's nobody here.
Yeah.
You got to go to England."
Yeah, sure.
And if you go to the States, it's going to be, so go to England. There was nothing here for Lennox at the time.
Lennox is a class act, and he does remind me of a lot of your father in that way. I mean, you don't hear anything bad said about Lennox by people who know him. You just don't. The only stuff you hear about Lennox is stuff that people make up. And listen, if I was Lennox Lewis, and I won an Olympic gold medal for Canada, and my first fight is at Superstars nightclub in Mississauga, and they can't even sell that place out.
I was there.
Right?
I was there.
Yeah, me too. I was there. And then, so what are you going to do? I mean, you get offered millions of dollars and full capacity crowds fighting at Wembley Arena in London, or are you going to stay here and fight for peanuts in the club shows here in Toronto?
A no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer. And nobody on planet Earth makes that decision.
And then everybody's yakking about, is he really a Brit, or is he a Jamaican, or is he a Canadian? Really, buddy? Really? Come on. Come on.
What was that? What was that maple leaf I saw on his chest when he won the Olympic gold medal? What was that?
That's right.
Where does he live? Where does he live now? Today, right?
And
the other thing too, when he was on Mitch, when he was on HBO, he was broadcasting, and Jim Lampley said, "And may have Lennox Lewis, the last undisputed universally recognized world heavyweight champion, won the Olympic gold medal for Britain." And then he kept talking, and Lennox said, "Just Jim, one mistake. I'm a Canadian citizen. I was a Canadian, and I won the Olympic gold medal for Canada. Canada taught me how to box. Arnie Beam taught me how to box. George Chuvalo taught me how to box." And people, in Kitchener.
Adrian Teodorescu. Yeah.
Watching now.
For sure.
Yeah.
So,
for sure.
when I see Lennox,
when
I see Lennox and I see George, when I see Lennox and I see George, I see the Canadianness, right? I see that respect, that politeness, that certain element of restraint in how they talk about people and the mannerisms, and I think that's a beautiful thing, I'm proud to say that they're friends, right? George always respected Lennox. Always said, you know what George always said about him too? he was super courageous. He was a courageous fighter. Like, he was brave, right? Imagine
Never ducked anybody. Never ducked anybody.
Never ducked anybody. And the two guys that beat him on knockouts, right? He comes back and flattens them both.
Yeah, has been Rockman, yeah.
That tells you about mental strength and resilience, man. Oh my God.
And Riddick Bowe wouldn't fight him. Riddick Bowe gave up the WBC title rather than fight him.
Yeah.
And he went to Riddick Bowe in the Olympics. He went to the USA Olympic team during the opening ceremonies. He said, "Who's Riddick Bowe?" And they said, "He is." "You're Riddick Bowe? I'm going to knock your ass the F out." Right before the game. "I'm going to destroy you." And he did.
And he did.
Lennox was a good all-around athlete.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Lennox played
football
and other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, guys. We're going to wrap this up. Before we do, though, I mentioned this before. We're looking to boost boxing profile. There's a project I'm working on. It's called for film and TV. It's called The Belt, and we probably need your expertise in this. We're going to need your expertise as we move this along. My producing partner is Amy Goldberg. You know who she is, a writer, producer in film and TV.
Yep.
Meatballs, Hangover franchise involved there. Maddie Jo Anderson, my daughter, who's amazing. Harris Goldberg, director, producer, numerous films, Quick Draw, Numb, Deuce Bigelow, Male Gigolo, etc. A lot of different credits there. And, of course, Lou, the writer of this project, Ben Guyett. He's a friend of yours.
Yes.
So let's tighten up the belt and get this thing going. The other thing I want to say is I have so much respect for George, and that's why I wanted to do this show today. It's like when I was a kid growing up, I mean, he was my hero. Like I when I would box with my brother, he was a little bigger than me, but I was always George. I had to be George, right? I mean, that's how far back it goes. So it was a fun thing, and we have so much in common. Losing a son, I know what the devastation that brings to a family, and helping others is such a big part of getting through that. And I know that's what your dad did, and he's helped so many people in so many different ways. And I just want to say that it's been a real honor to have you guys on here to talk about George today. And our prayers are with you, your dad, and your family, and make sure you give him a big hug for us, and transfer that love, because I know it's there. And as guests on Joe Tilley Sports, we have a club link foursome for you. We have to wait a little while before we get to use that. It's not quite the weather for golfing, but remember, we're all in it together. We've got the Raptors, Leafs, and Super Bowl news when we come back. And thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Always the best. Lou, great to see you. Thanks again.
Always a privilege to see you, Mitch.
Promotional consideration provided by ClubLink. ClubLink. One membership, more golf. Excuse me. Have you heard of the new Divot app?
There's a Divot app?
No, but there is a divot. And we're going to have to do something about that. It's simple. Just pick up the divot and replace it. All sorted. Have a good round. Addiction Rehab Toronto. Toronto's #1 alcohol and drug treatment center. Saving lives, reuniting families. The only treatment center in the province to offer medical detox, treatment, sober living, and lifetime aftercare all in one place. Our unique and specialized programs are designed to equip our clients with the tools to successfully lead a life of dignity, respect, and purpose. Let us help save your life or your loved one's life. Call today for more information or to facilitate an intervention. 1-855-787-2424 or visit addictionrehabtoronto.ca. COSA, Central Ontario Standardbred Association, providing a united voice for harness horse people racing at Ontario tracks. Check out your benefits today at COSAonline.com Also, check out Costa TV on Facebook and YouTube for all the latest harness news and live action updates. Live racing year-round, and go to freescratch.ca for your chance to win a new fabulous prize every day with COSA. Time now for our weekly sports analytics segment. Here's Kwame Bryan.
Hi, my name is Kwame. I'm a developer ambassador here at Allegrand, and it's a great honor to bring the stats for today's show. George Chuvalo was a great boxer, Canadian icon, never lost by KO, and we're known of boxers to be, strong hearts and strong chins. But what are some of the softer sides of boxers that we might not talk about? Great again to bring the stats for today's show, and see you next week. Bye.
Yeah, thanks, Kwame. I think we can answer that question like this. I mean, we talked about it earlier in the show. George Chuvalo has helped a lot of people. Boxers are some of the best folks you're ever going to find. Sometimes the business of boxing can be a bit of a problem. We touched on that earlier, but the fighters themselves, well, they're awesome. Well, this is a strange set of games for the Raptors. A tough stretch indeed. A quirk in the schedule has them playing 9 of 10 games on the road. Of course, their home games are also on the road in Tampa. But a great start to the road trip. Club record 54 points for Fred VanVleet, and a triple-double for Kyle Lowry, and a 15-point win over the Magic in the opener of that.
The Raptor record, Fred VanVleet with 54.
VanVleet is just the man. 54 points. And after the game, there you go, Fred. Congratulations, my friend. That's a club record. And the Raps held their annual visit to the Sick Kids Hospital the other day, and Fred VanVleet was there too. Unfortunately, because of COVID, it was a virtual visit.
Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam, as well as the Raptor.
So my first question's for Fred. Which practice drill would Pascal say is his favorite?
Defense. Oh, you can't see it. Damn.
Oh.
It's definitely not defense. I put shooting, and then if it's not shooting, it's spinning. Oh my God. No, it's defense, man.
So I have a question for Pascal. If Fred wasn't a professional basketball player, what job would he be in?
I think he'd be a coach.
Be a coach. Coach?
Oh, yeah, come on, man. Fred is out there, man. He's a general out there. I think he'd be a good coach, man.
Fred, what do you think you'd do if you were?
I would be a singer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Would you care to demonstrate?
Nah, I got a sore throat.
Hi, my name is Dylan. My questions for the Raptors are, how do you guys stay motivated with the absence of fans?
It's definitely different, but I think it's almost been a full year now since we've had fans, and I think we're kind of getting used to it, but we all would love to play in front of fans again, for sure.
Hi, my name's Rebecca. My question is, I notice you wear a lot of different jerseys, so which one's your favorite?
I think for me, my favorite jersey so far probably be the black jerseys, black and red. The one that the Raptor has right now.
Yeah.
Raptor, do they ever let you participate in the practices? And if they do, are there any players that can't guard you during practice?
Okay, he's writing it down. Fred, cannot guard him.
This guy, man.
Now, former Raptor Vince Carter has just launched a new scholarship program providing tremendous opportunities. A $25,000 per student scholarship targets high school students who have a passion for sports, music, film, fashion, broadcasting, media, science, technology, engineering, and math. The application portal is open to applicants worldwide between the ages of 16 to 18 who will be entering grade 11 and or 12 in September 2021 and each year forward. Recipients will attend top caliber private schools with unique academic programs. Well, the programs are open to all. Vince Carter strongly encourages the Black community, Indigenous community, people of color, and young women to apply. The scholarship criteria involves a review of academic scores, personal character, community service, and a 500-word essay. Applicants are directed to the exclusive application portal at parismedia.org/community/ or email info@parismedia.org. Well, the Leafs are back in the six, getting ready for 3 straight dates with the Canucks. The Buds are coming off an exceptional trip to Alberta that resulted in 3 victories and an overtime loss, vaulting them to the top of that All-Canadian Northern Division, at least temporarily. Defensively, they're better. Offensively, they're solid. Good balance in that power play. Well, it's been phenomenal. A couple line shakeups. Wayne Simmons will play up on the second line with Tavares and Nylander. Ilya Mikheyev has been bumped to the third line. Alex Kerfoot may sit this one out with an injury. We'll see how that goes. Got a good feeling about this club, folks. The National Lacrosse League has decided to scrap a proposal for the abbreviated summer season coming up due to the uncertain times that we're experiencing right now due to COVID. The league felt it best to point their efforts towards a full season, which we begin this fall. So go Rock. The Jays have expressed an interest in free agent catcher Yadier Molina. The 38-year-old hit .260 with 4 homers and 18 RBI in a short 2020 season with the Cardinals. He's a career .280 hitter. Tom Brady's Tampa Bay Buccaneers are getting ready to rumble with the Kansas City Chiefs in Super Bowl 55. Brady is making his 10th trip to the championship game. He's won it 6 times. That's a record, but he won't be getting number 7. It should be interesting, but Patrick Mahomes can beat you a number of different ways with his arm, with his feet. The Chiefs are the defending champs. They're going to make it back-to-back titles with a 37-24 victory with another Super Bowl MVP crown for Patty M. There you go. And folks, you'll be happy to know our epic contest starts today. 12 T-shirts and 3 beautiful color prints. To enter, invite 10 plus friends to Joe Tilley Sports on Facebook and subscribe to Joe Tilley on YouTube. For a bonus entry, like the Talented Daughters Facebook page, longtime Toronto Sun cartoonist and sports illustrator Rob McDougall has provided us with some Mitch Marner T-shirts and some prints to give away, all original art. Rob is Canada's premier sports artist who has also done work for the Blue Jays and the Hockey News. We will notify the lucky winners. 1 T-shirt or print will be handed out each week. Good luck and enjoy Rob's work at robmcdougall.com. A reminder to subscribe to Joe Tilley on YouTube. You don't want to miss the latest news. We close with a look at the folks who make this show possible. I highly recommend them all. Thanks again, once again, to Mitch, Chuvalo, and Lou Eisen for joining us on the show. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week when Marcel Dion and Bernie Nichols join the program. We'll see you then.
Get Aldo at Remax Crossroads. Do you want to buy or sell a home? Could 31 years of real estate experience help you? Why not speak to an amazing team that loves to overpromise and overdeliver? Call 416-GET-ALDO or visit www.getaldo.com to find out what next level real estate looks like. RS Demolition and Excavation has extensive experience with complete teardowns and interior strip-outs. Looking to build a custom home? RS Excavating Services has the experience you need to build in established neighborhoods. For the highest level of quality and cost-efficient results, we provide innovative demolition solutions completed on time and on budget while ensuring our number one priority, safety. Call 647-852-3006 for an estimate or visit rsdemolition.ca. Brian Gribben Insurance Planning, helping you solidify your financial future.
At BGIP, what we do that's unique in the marketplace is we show people how to spend and enjoy their money in the early years of retirement without the fear of running out. Also, we're able to do this without you having to change financial advisors. Please look us up at bgip.ca today, and let's book a 30-minute phone call to see how we can bring value to you and your family in your planning.
Call Brian today for all your retirement needs. We did. 905-686-5678. Gold Line Resources, discovering high-grade gold in Sweden. Gold Line Resources owns a prospective portfolio of 4 high-grade gold exploration projects located on the Gold Line mineral belt of north-central Sweden, and 1 gold exploration project in the Skellefteå belt of north-central Sweden. For more information on how you can invest in this new initiative, go to goldlineresources.com or call 1-800-858-9710. Goldline Resources can also be found on the TSX Ventures Exchange as GLDL.